Okay, welcome everybody. Yeah, our themes today around trees and forest gardens and agroforestry and things like that. And then there'll be Sherry, who's coming along a little bit later to run her session on appreciative inquiry, and we'll be introducing a few techniques around that. Before we get going, I'll say we had a bit of overrun yesterday, and I actually got a message from Laura about the asking a question or adding something to the conversation about water in the landscape. I think, yeah, because we had kind of overrun a bit, that we didn't have quite the level of discussion I would have liked about some of those things. So maybe we could have a quick, Laura could share there what she shared with me and have a little bit of a discussion. I don't get too into it because then we'll just have the same problem of overrun of today's stuff. But you know, if there were any matters arising from either of the sessions yesterday that both got wrapped up, the soil session and the water session got wrapped up probably a little bit too rapidly without any proper discussion and questions. So maybe have a little bit of time on that, and then we'll move into today's stuff. So, Laura, do you want to just share what you shared with me?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for mentioning. Yeah, I was like wondering kind of why we put swales on one spot of in the strategy in the depletion zone, and I was wondering because before I applied this before, but on the top of the hill around the house in Portugal where I was working, and well, there was like many dry periods and then some periods with 60 centimeters of rain in one day, which was intense and majestic. But we had to catch the water to plant new young trees, and the young trees would need some extra water. So we thought it would be good to do there. And yeah, so like an extra thing we applied was to make some sort of holes, some overflows in swales, because otherwise like the dams would rupture of the high amount of water. So I was maybe thinking this is the reason also that you would normally do it on a low level.
Yeah, I think, you know, introduced it and said by and large, unfortunately I haven't got the slideshow to revisit at the moment, but as you may remember, Bill Mollison argues in his book that above I think it's 15% slope should be permanent tree cover, and below that is, you know, where the land is starting to kind of maybe the slope is becoming a little bit more gentle, basically because it's a lot easier to work the land at that degree of slope. If you're working on really steep slopes, it can be, sorry, I'm not sure if that's really working, but I'm trying to indicate a really steep slope, and it can be quite difficult to actually, in terms of the earthworks involved and the machinery and the effort. But yeah, I mean, that's just a sort of a general rule, you know, obviously, and all with general rules or general guidelines, they can be stretched and adapted to what works for you. So sounds like, yeah, taking the technique, use it in a slightly different way, but if it works for you, then that's great. All this stuff is like a toolbox, really, and, you know, there's guidance on the use, but you can always stretch that and change it and adapt it to what works for you. So, but yeah, the general guideline is that it would be, you know, on the more shallow slope, purely because it's more difficult to work the land above that, you know, actually do earthworks and have machinery doing that stuff. Or,
yeah, we had to do everything by hand with
sure,
with pickaxes.
Yeah, but quite often if it's broad scale, if you're looking at a big, you know, sort of acres and hectares of land, you know, it's quite difficult to do that by hand sometimes. So, yeah. Okay, any other questions or comments and things that came up yesterday or weren't clear or... Okay, maybe there weren't as many things as I thought. Okay, so we will move into today's session then, and I'm going to do a screen share. And this session is around trees and their energy transactions. And I'm going to begin with an invitation to participate in a visualization exercise. So what I'd like to do is make yourself nice and comfortable, and you can either close your eyes or you could focus on the image in front of you. It's up to you. So when you're nice and relaxed, I'd like you to remember a time when you really enjoyed being in the woodland or in the forest. Maybe when you were a child, or maybe when you're an adult. Remember the day you went there, how you got there, who were you with, or maybe you were on your own. Remember that day and begin the journey again. See yourself travelling to the woodland area, arriving. Look around the landscape as you approach the wooded area. Now you're at the edge of the woodland itself. You enter the woodland. And now you're under the high canopy. Pause for a few moments. What do you notice? Walk around. What sounds can you hear? What smells greet you as you wander around? After a while, you find a place to sit and rest, to just be with the forest and take it all in. How do you feel being here? Slowly, you become aware of the processes that surround you. Of the roots of the trees reaching deep into the subsoil, drawing up water and nutrients and lifting them to the tree's highest branches, the most efficient pump in the world. Of the transpiration of that water into the atmosphere, building rain clouds and powering entire weather systems through the vast collective leaf surface of the forest canopy. Of the magic of photosynthesis, of sunlight combining water and carbon dioxide to create carbohydrates in the form of cellulose and lignins, the building blocks of all living things. Of the buffering effects of the leaf canopy and the forest structure, mitigating against extremes of climate such as rainfall, winds and drought, cleaning the air and protecting the soil from runoff, flooding and compaction. Of the wider ecosystems, cycles and energy flows of which trees are a part, providing habitat for a myriad of insects, amphibians, birds and mammals. Of symbiotic mycorrhizal associations between roots and fungal mycelium. Nature's internet, sharing nutrients and locking up soil carbon. Now just sit for a few minutes and visualize the complexity of the forest and all of those wonderful life-giving processes. Now begin to make your way out, retracing your steps. Take a moment for a final look around the forest before you walk out from under the canopy and come back to the space we are sharing in the room where you are. I'll stop sharing a little while and welcome everybody back and invite anyone that would like to share anything that came up for you, a place that maybe you remembered or a place that's special to you, a woodland place or a particular tree. Yeah, just invite you to kind of share any thoughts or a story about woodlands and trees that are special to you.
I went back to a place when I was a little girl. I didn't live here then. I lived in a place called Bracknell, and we were surrounded by woodland, but we were in a housing estate. And we used to work for a place called South Hill Park, just as children. And it was divided into half by a road. So we walked across the grass, across the road, and then into the woodlands. And I always feel very comfortable and relaxed in woodlands ever since I was a child. And we used to play there, winter, summer, spring, August, autumn time. And I always particularly remember the smell of it's the smell that comes from the warmth of the sun and the floor of the woodland itself, and the smell of the bark, the sound of the leaves rustling, feeling the sun in the open spaces. And I know people think this is weird, I've always hugged trees, always cuddled up to trees. And we used to sit round the base of one particularly big oak and discuss what we've been doing at school. But it was a place of relaxation and comfort for me. Still is. We still walk a lot in woodlands with our granddaughter and our son. And I always find I'm completely at home there. I think I'd like to live in the forest, to be honest. It's beautiful, and I've always loved it. So ever since I was a child, I've been walking through different forests, different places. Yeah, be quite comfortable there.
Well, thank you, Anne.
Pleasure.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Anybody else? Dagmar.
Yeah, that was lovely, and I think, like Anne, I've also grown up with, coming from an Eastern European background, with fungus. Looking for fungi was what I was brought up doing. So we always went to forests all the time. But recently, I've been having lived in the city for 30 odd years. We've been lucky enough to take ownership of a woodland in North Wales, and it's just our sanctuary. And the exercise that you've just done with us, Graham, is kind of what I do when I'm feeling stressed or down or unhappy. I just close my eyes and I imagine myself, just the first time you get out of the car is you can just smell the words. And I think you mentioned that they were actinomycetes and all that kind of that forest smell. And then, we walk up a really steep track to get to the camp, and then we just sit there and look around, and sometimes the sun's shining through the trees, and we've got the most amazing view of the mountains, and it's just beautiful. And I also hug trees, Anne, and I think it's an important thing to do. But one thing that struck me when you were talking, Graham, was that, when you talk about all the xylem and the phloem and all the activity that's going on, it's amazing that plants are quiet and don't make any sound. You can't hear all this. Even our stomachs rumble occasionally, or when we're eating, we kind of chomp our food, but with plants, they're completely silent. So it's quite an extraordinary thing. Forest bathing, I think, is the term for.
Oh, yeah.
Or, it's a very therapeutic thing.
Mm. Well, thank you, Dagmar. Yeah, anybody else like to share?
I just wanted to say that what came to mind, actually, what struck me was that the times when I'm in the woodland is how satisfied you become very, very quickly. And it's quite hard to want to be somewhere else when you're in the forest or the woods. I think it speaks to us really quite, it's immediate, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Joe. Hi, Rachel. We're just sharing some stories of times we were in the woodlands or the forest or a particular woodland that might be important to you. Yeah, anybody else like to share the woodland story? Carla?
Well, I think I definitely resonate with all that you've just shared. Like, there's so much in the being held and the immediate effects on your whole system. I think one of the biggest things that I take from it, and I'm noticing the difference now of not being sort of, when I was in the van in the summer as a walk from this huge, completely immersive woodland, and would just lie on this tree every day, and I knew it was right there. But I think one of the biggest things that I feel from it is it's such a tonic from all of the man-made systems and all of the sort of actually not particularly purposeful or slightly pointless in my opinion, systems that touch all of our lives when we're not in nature and completely separate. And it's so nourishing for me, and it sort of quietens all of that. It's a beautiful reminder, and just doing it then I could feel it in my body. It was like all these things just slowly turn sort of transparent over there. So that was really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to share? I mean, it's no. Don't worry if you'd rather keep it to yourself. That's fine as well. But
Just
okay.
a little thing I just thought, then I hadn't even clocked that I'd done it, is every time we open a session I get this out that I made in those woods, and it's like bringing it back. He's like a little and I put it in the trees while we were there, but it's sort of a subconscious back to that space thing.
Great, thank you. Little kind of stick man thing. Laura.
I was in a forest 6 years ago, I think. It's quite an old forest, and many big trunks. And I remember the smell of the wet leaves and the sun coming on it as well, and the wind rushing through the canopy. I was also sitting there for like half an hour on one beautiful spot and just admiring all these visual features the trees have, which sometimes look like faces and arms, and they felt really alive and talking kind of to me. And I remember when you said we had to walk out of the forest, that when I walked out, there was beautiful artwork on my way out, also in real life. So I saw that again, and yeah, it was pleasant to be there again.
Thank you, Laura.
I'm lucky to have quite a lot of woodland close by to where I live that I've done a lot of dog walking over the years, but I think that, you know, we've also got open areas and as well of moorland and stuff, and that there is such a difference between, you know, they're all great, getting out to the countryside is all great, but that experience of being in the woodland is quite a different one, and it's always where I would gravitate back to, really, because of that. I don't know, I find it helps my mind wander a bit. It just helps it go into a different kind of relaxed state. And we have one near us that has got a lot of wild yew trees, and I've never seen that anywhere else, and just it has a really different vibe. It's called Goblin Coombe, and it does feel a bit like that, you know, all the moss and everything, and it feels like you're in a much well, it is a very ancient woodland, and it has it's magical, which makes it sound a bit woo-woo, but it's not. There's something else going on that's not just woo-woo. I think what's great about it as well is that there is a you know, all sorts of people use it, and it's well used, and yet it still manages to be a place that you can lose yourself in. And I think that's because, you know, the sound and everything does get deadened around it, doesn't it? So if you're in your little pocket, then that's great. You can be in your own little pocket if that's what you want. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I guess for me, it was Hockley Woods, which is in Essex, quite near to where I live. And I think I mentioned at the beginning of the course, I think I told that story where we'd go with my granddad and me. We'd go out for drives in the car and visit the farm or whatever, and that's how I kind of maybe connected with kind of vegan thing, you know, all those years ago. But the other place we would go a lot to was Hockley Woods, which was about, well, it seemed like a really long walk from his house, but it was probably only about half a mile or something. But when you're kind of 5 years old, it kind of seems like we're going on this really big adventure. And we go to the woods, and just the hours we'd spend there kind of lifting up logs and seeing the creatures underneath, you know, the beetles and things like, and the ants. It was the woodland ants. That's what I always remember, those great big ants, and they'd build great big piles out of leaves and twigs and things, and we just watched them for hours and hours. And I think, yeah, just that whole thing of being in the woods, it was just like, you know, very, very lucky to have had that experience, I think. And yeah, so that was kind of me, I guess, and my story. I'll move on. I'll go back to the screen share. And move along. Next. So, yeah, I think it came out in the feedback there about there's all these processes. You know, we see the tree, just a tree sitting there in the landscape. It doesn't seem to be doing much. It's not making any sound. It's not moving. And so we could be forgiven for thinking maybe it's just this static thing in the landscape. And I thought I'd maybe look at some of those processes that are going on in a little bit more depth, and yeah, see what is actually going on, visit some of those cycles, because there are all these incredible cycles and processes going on all the time. And what I'm going to do is break it down into, sort of look at each of those cycles or those processes individually or separately from each other, and yeah, I suppose that's just our way of, as human beings, getting our head around, you know, we have to break things down into their components to kind of make sense of them. But what the trees are actually doing, they're actually doing this stuff all the time, which I think is important to realise. I'm just ready the meeting controls. That's it. And so, yeah, there's our tree in the landscape. And the first cycle I'm going to look at is the water cycle. And again, it's a cycle. It doesn't have a beginning. It doesn't have an end. It's a continuous process. But in order to help us make sense of it, I've got to start somewhere. So I'll start with our roots that are drawing up water from deep underground. These roots are accessing subterranean water. They're drawing it up through the roots, up through the tree, and that happens through, I think it was Dagmar who said it, the cells that are known as the xylem. There's a xylem and a phloem. Xylem spelled Xylum, which are like these tiny, just below the surface of the bark of the tree, they're these tiny little tubes that are constantly sort of drawing up water through the tree here, through the water that is constantly transpired into the atmosphere through the surface of the leaves. So that's constantly pulling up this water through the tree and through transpiration, releasing that into the atmosphere. And I'm not sure, I think the writing might be a bit small on the screen here, but there are actually bacteria that live on the leaf surface of many, many trees. This bacteria Pseudomonas syringae. And what happens as the water transpires from the leaf surface, these bacteria are drawn up on the water particles. They travel up into the atmosphere at the same time, and these particular bacteria have a property that enables them to form ice crystals. So what will happen, they will start to kind of form these ice crystals, and they begin to coalesce in the atmosphere through kind of nucleation process, and more and more of these water particles with these bacteria will gather and coalesce, and eventually they're going to form rain clouds in the sky, and these rain clouds will get larger and larger, and eventually they'll get to a size where they just can't hold their kind of mass anymore, and they begin to collapse, and so of course it begins raining. And so we have the rainfall coming down again, and that rainfall, as we saw in a little demonstration yesterday with the erosion thing, that if that rain, those drops of rain that have travelled thousands of feet through the air, if they were just to hit bare soil, they can be very damaging, as we saw. But what actually happens, that rain will hit the leaf surface, it will hit the canopy, and the canopy of the trees will absorb the kinetic energy of that rainfall, slow it down. So instead of that rain hitting the earth with that really high kinetic energy causing that damage, instead the rain is actually going to go through the tree and actually reach the ground in a much more kind of gentle way. Additionally, of course, in the autumn, the tree will stop photosynthesizing, and the tree will cut off nutrients through a process called ascission. The tree will cut off kind of the growth hormones that support the leaf, keep the leaves alive. So it effectively cause the tree to shed its leaves. Those leaves drop to the ground, they break down over time, adding nutrients, but also helping to absorb the rainfall, to kind of protect and buffer against heavy rainfall. So you've got this whole cycle going on here of the tree drawing up water, transpiring that into the atmosphere, forming rain clouds, and the rain is kind of coming back down again, and the tree is playing an active role in that process. So that's a brief tour of the water cycle, and have a quick look at the carbon cycle next. So I mentioned the word photosynthesis just now. So trees actually had this, I guess every tree actually has these hundreds of thousands of built-in solar panels that are able to transform sunlight into energy, into a different form of energy. So basically there's our sun shining there. The sunlight is hitting the leaf canopy, the surface of those hundreds of thousands of leaves, each of which is a little solar panel, and they're combining this water that the tree is drawing up with carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and they're converting the atmospheric carbon into plant biomass, basically carbohydrates and sugars that make up plant biomass. And so they're taking in the carbon dioxide and they're giving out oxygen. So we've got the oxygen cycle going on as well there. But returning to our carbon cycle, so trees are, through this process of photosynthesis, that they're able to manufacture their own foods from sunlight, water and carbon dioxide, basically. Animals, unfortunately, don't have, we are not autotrophic. We can't create our own food. We have to get our food second-hand. And so we have our browsing herbivorous mammal, in this case, I think it might be a deer or something, is converting plant biomass into animal biomass, which is effectively what we're doing. So it's all second-hand. All of our, everything we eat is basically second-hand plant biomass. And of course, anything that is carnivorous that preys on our herbivorous mammal here it's also, it's kind of third-hand plant biomass, if you like. So it's been converted into animal biomass, then a carnivore will convert that into like second-level animal biomass. Is this making sense so far? Of course, in time, our animal here will excrete, so it's digested that food. Anything that doesn't get converted into biomass is then kind of excreted as droppings, and in time, of course, the animal will die for one reason or another, through natural causes or old age or whatever, and that too will break down and be reabsorbed by our tree. A little bit like, we talked about this in the soil food web yesterday briefly. So our decomposer fungi and bacteria are breaking down plant and animal wastes into humus and those basic nutrients. But it's actually a more complex process than that, because we have the fungi kingdom involved. And we've talked a little bit about fungi and mycorrhiza. So in brief, I guess fungi are similar to animals in that they can't manufacture their own foodstuffs. They can't manufacture their own carbohydrates and sugars. They too have to get them second hand, just as we do. And basically there are three types of fungi, four types of fungi. We have our saprophytic fungi that feed on dead plant material. I think we touched on the saprophytes yesterday. So things that will, quite often if you see sort of dead wood in a woodland or a forest, or just wood that's lying about, you quite often see it colonised by fungi, and they're actually tearing apart those cell walls and those lignins and feeding and turning that into their sort of food stuff. And as we said, were it not for our saprophytic fungi that feed on dead plant matter, the world would be kind of knee deep in, or deeper than that, knee deep in dead wood, because there'd just be no way of that breaking down. And in fact, that there is a theory that actually the where most of our in the Carboniferous era, when the world was actually covered with when plants and animals first began to move onto land, fungi hadn't actually kind of figured out how to digest kind of dead wood at that stage. So hence we have, all the coal deposits that were coal and oil deposits that were laid down up to the end of the Carboniferous era, and then we don't get so much coal and oil after that because fungi had basically figured out how to turn dead wood into a foodstuff. So the implications of that, I guess, are that we can never again have a fossil fuel based, you know, world in the way we have at the moment, and the way that we're kind of maybe coming to the end of now. So yeah, so our kind of saprophytic fungi that feed on dead wood, and then we have parasitic fungi, which has a which feeds on live, or it takes carbohydrates and sugars from live trees, but it doesn't actually give anything back. It's a one-way transaction, if you like. And those fungi, just like our saprophytic fungi, they're very important in the soil food web. They tend to feed it, you know, they'll colonize or have relationships with weaker trees or diseased trees, and they help to kind of maintain that equilibrium by taking some of those trees out of the system when they're kind of weak and diseased. Of course, what can happen if the system is unbalanced, we have things like honey fungus, which is a parasitic fungi, and can become quite a menace, or quite a problem in woodland. And that's mainly, you know, the honey fungus has always been there. It's part of that natural food web, but it's getting kind of out of hand because the system is unbalanced, and then that creates, well, how do we actually cope with that? But the other third category of fungi are what we would call the symbiotic fungi, which have actually a mutually beneficial relationship with the tree. And I'm going to maybe zone in on our mycorrhizal fungi a little bit closer. So as I think I've said previously on the course, the word mycorrhiza is like a joint word referring to myco, so which is Latin, you know, sort of fungi, and rhiza, which is the root, and it's this relationship between the fungi, mycelia, and the tree or plant roots. So here we have our mycelia in the soil, massively magnified, obviously. These would be microscopic. And the mycelia is sending out these threads into the soil, and again magnified. We have the tip of one of the root hairs of this tree here, and that's growing in the soil. And these sort of these mycelia are creeping through, creating this web through the soil. And I like this term that was suggested by another person I teach with, Benson Jack, who hopefully is going to be doing a whole session on fungi next weekend. So quite often when you read about, we think about these fungi, some of the language can be a bit problematic possibly. You quite often hear terms like the mycelia will invade the roots of the plant, or they'll colonize the roots of the plant. And these are kind of quite maybe problematic words that have a legacy in some of our ways of thinking about natural systems, and we kind of may put human constructs onto the way natural systems function. But Benson uses this term my consent, that it's a consensual relationship. So there's our mycelium spreading through the soil, sending its strands in all different directions, and then one of these mycelia comes across the plant root hair or the tree root hair, and this sort of conversation goes on, sort of, hey, I see you've got you're carrying you seem to have quite a lot of carbohydrates and sugars, and I can't make those carbohydrates and sugars. So I was just wondering, maybe we could have some sort of relationship here where I could maybe make use of or share in some of those carbohydrates and sugars, and in turn I can access all these nutrients and things that your roots can't get to. Phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, all these things that you can sort of get to them, but if we actually have this relationship, we can actually, you'll be able to access them a lot easier, and you'll have a kind of almost a secondary root system that will be of benefit to both of us. So how about, we get it on together, basically. And so the root hair will say, yeah, that sounds good. I've got more carbohydrates than I need. I actually manufacture a lot more than I can actually make use of. And it'd be very useful to me to be able to get hold of these other things you're talking about, this nitrogen, this phosphorus. And so the mycelia will then, in some cases, some kinds of mycorrhizal fungi will actually, they'll create like a sheath that kind of surrounds the root hair, and others, they'll actually enter the root hair, and they'll begin to kind of combine with the actual plant cells until eventually we have this, say, like a joint organism that got this mutually beneficial relationship going on. And what's interesting is only relatively recently, over the last, I'm not sure how long ago, I think mycorrhizal fungi, people have been aware of mycorrhizal fungi for a long time, but it was always assumed that the relationship was parasitic, that the notion that it's a mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship wasn't recognised till relatively recently. I've got like some Second World War gardening books that were written in like maybe the 1930s or 1940s, and there's bits in there about going, how to get rid of these mycorrhizal fungi because they're a menace in the garden and they're going to attack your trees and this, that and the other. So even as recently as then, it was assumed that, or it wasn't recognised that this is actually this is a good thing. This is actually a beneficial relationship that's going on, although that is commonly recognised now. And we're still quite, the research or the knowledge we've got on mycorrhizal fungi and the relationships and what's actually going on in the soil, we're still really only scratching the surface. We know about the nutrient exchanges, and we know that this secondary mycorrhizal root system helps the trees to access water, particularly in times of drought that might otherwise be difficult for the plant to access. But there's all these other things that we really don't know that much about at the moment. Apparently, nutrients through this whole wood wide web of all these, all the hundreds of thousands or millions of trees that are kind of interconnected by this fungi. In a way, we consider them as separate, each as a separate individual tree or plant, but actually we can consider the whole thing one big organism in a way, because of all these interconnections that are going on. And for example, if a certain nutrient is deficient in one part of a forest, for example, like maybe there's a shortage of nitrogen somewhere for whatever reason, and there's an excess of nitrogen somewhere else in the forest, they can actually physically, through this mycorrhizal network, actually physically move like the excess of nitrogen to where it's needed, where there's a shortage, which is pretty sort of mind-blowing, I think. That, and I think there's also research that if like a a browsing animal, our deer. Actually, I'll move on to the next picture. So there's our deer that's browsing on the tree and causing some damage to the tree by eating the leaves, and it can actually send a message to other trees that, hey, this deer, this browsing mammal is on the way. It's going to come and chew your leaves. And trees that are kind of fairly nearby will actually start producing like a hormone that doesn't taste nice, so the animal won't, will be less inclined to be feeding on that one. So there's some sort of communication network going on there, and we really don't know that much about it at this stage. It's all quite, an unknown field of research. But back to our image here briefly. Another thing that was only relatively recently discovered is through this interconnection that is going on, through this process of the roots or the tree giving its sugars and carbohydrates to the fungi, and the fungi giving nutrients to the tree roots. A byproduct, or something that happens because of that, is this substance called glomalin that is released into the soil. And this was only discovered, I think, in the mid-1990s, so only about 20-25 years ago. And this substance, glomalin, if that is present in the soil, it massively increases the capacity of soils to hold carbon. So in terms of the soil and forests being a carbon sink, I think this glomalin has a massive part to play in this. So there is, move on again. So although the tree itself is taking carbon out of the atmosphere and locking it up as plant biomass, as wood, it's actually the glomalin that's being created that is the real kind of carbon sink in this situation. So that's a brief look at mycorrhiza and some of those relationships. So something else our tree is doing in terms of its functions is the lateral roots here are stabilising soil and preventing erosion. We talked more about this yesterday, but just to briefly revisit, if we've deforested our hillsides and removed all the tree cover, rain is to sweep down, carrying away precious topsoil into the rivers and cause floods. But if we restore that forest cover, the tree cover and the canopy, so rain is dripping through and soaking into fallen leaves to maintain the underground water. So we talked a little bit about that yesterday, but it's always worth a little revisit of one of those functions of our tree. And a couple of other bits I've added now. So trees and forests can cool surrounding air by several degrees and reduce evaporation from soil. I think that came out in one of the experiences that we were sharing just now about how it's just the atmosphere in the woodland or the forest is just so it could be like on a really if you think like a really hot day in July or something, you've been walking around maybe and you're walking across some fields, bare fields with no shelter. It's incredibly hot and not very comfortable, and then you come to the woodland and go into the woodland and immediately you feel the temperature drop, that cool atmosphere. And vice versa, in the winter, the temperature in the woodland and the general atmosphere is going to be, it's going to be a little bit warmer, a little bit more sheltered than just bare ground or bare fields outside of the woodland. So there is that mitigation or that buffering of temperature against extremes of temperature. And on the other side here, trees and forests provide shelter and mitigate against winds and extremes of temperature. So trees as windbreaks. So little diagram here. So here's our with no wind protection, and this person here, they're trying to grow their crops with no shelter, no protection. So we've got the wind coming across. Crops are flattened, potentially wind scorch. We have the moisture and heat loss in the soil. Our fruit trees are being kind of damaged here. More inclined to frosts, low pollination rates because our pollinating insects, they've got no shelter, no protection, and the evaporation from the ponds. So this is with no wind, no protection at all. A solid wall or fence, to protect our growing plot here, tends to have this. What will happen? The wind will hit our impenetrable wall. It's got nowhere to go, so it goes straight over the top. The vortex on the other side and cause all manner of problems and damage here. Whereas actually by having a shelter belt of trees and hedgerows with a variety of heights and different species to maximise protection and also offer other potential yields. So we've got a much more much nicer environment, or much more productive environment for our crops that we're wanting to grow. So trees and hedgerows and shelter belts. And finally, I think that trees obviously are habitat for all manner of other organisms, for fungi, for bacteria, insects, birds, mammals, amphibians might live in the roots, under the holes in the roots and things like that. Yes, all manner of things that our tree, in terms, this tree that we initially thought was just passively sitting there in the landscape, not doing much, there's actually this incredible amounts of things it actually is doing. And as I say, it's not doing it in isolation. It's part of a community of all these different trees and organisms that are interacting, basically creating and maintaining whole planetary systems, like weather systems, all kinds of things. Anything else our tree might be doing or might offer, or potential things our tree could provide?
They provide food and fuel.
Absolutely. So food and fuel, yes, and
shelter for our homes.
Yeah, definitely. So yes, all manner of foods that fruits, nuts. Some trees are leguminous, as in they actually have high protein bean crops, things like that. Yeah, definitely. And there's actually the leaves themselves. As I say, us human beings, we've got our mammal here, our deer, which is eating the leaves off the tree and converting that into animal biomass. We can't, us human beings, we can't directly do that. We can't just take the leaves off the tree and eat them and convert that to directly to plant biomass, animal biomass, because we don't have the right digestive system. Certain animals that have, complex digestive systems, they have like kind of two stomachs that kind of break down those. We don't have the stomachs that can break down those tough cell walls of leafy growth. But we have devised processes where we can actually extract the proteins from leaves. I can't go in, I haven't got time to go into the technical side of it now, But there's a booklet in the Dropbox about making leaf curd, and a lot of workers, there's been a lot of research on actually removing or separating the protein element of plant leaf, that cell wall, plant cells, and making it into a digestible form. And it's had a lot of it's been used a lot in kind of famine situations where people have needed, there's not a lot of food about, but people have needed to kind of get food into people quickly as a famine thing. But I think it has an awful lot of, if we're thinking about how we're going to, potential coming age of the tree and moving away from animal-based diets, how, I think leaf curd actually has a role to play in that. And this booklet that's in the Dropbox goes into a bit more depth about that. But what's interesting, one of the things in the book, they're talking about like potential resistance to leaf curd as a food stuff, because it's this kind of, one of the objections is it's just not appealing to people as a dietary thing. It's bright green for one thing, and apparently people tend to have a bit of resistance to eating bright green things. But also saying, because it's like this powder, and it's like a very dry powder that sort of, it's not very palatable. But then you could say, to my response to that was, you could say the same of wheat flour or grain flour. Nobody sits at, you don't go to the shop and buy a bag of wholemeal flour and sit there eating it straight out of the bag. You process it in other ways. You combine it with other things. So I think, if we can get over those cultural resistances, I think leaf curd has a lot of potential to food stuff. So that's a slight aside there. So we said timber, fuel, food. Anything else that our tree or tree crop or trees might provide for us?
Beauty. I also would add beauty.
Beauty, the whole aesthetic dimension. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And medicines.
Medicinal? Yeah.
Yeah.
All manner of medicines that I suppose some of the obvious things would be willow for aspirin, but pretty much.
And they're using you for cancer research, aren't they?
Yeah, indeed. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. One of the when I was on chemotherapy, one of the drugs I was given, a thing called doxytaxel, which are actually derived from the yew tree. So yeah. And yeah, it's a whole. I think even a lot of air quotes, kind of artificial pharmaceuticals are actually derived from, or they're analogues of tree-based, things that were originally discovered in various types of trees and things like that. And I think there's so much we don't know as well, about the potential healing properties of trees. So yeah, so medicines is another thing. Yep. Anything else our tree provides?
It provides a meeting point or guidance to or from a place.
Yeah. Could you say a little bit more about that, Joe?
Well, if people want to come together and meet at a certain place, you can say the big old oak tree by such and such tree, or so it sort of provides a meeting spot, and also, when you're going on walks and stuff like that, it can kind of help us to not get lost. I mean, getting lost is quite nice sometimes, but sometimes we don't want to get lost sometimes.
So I guess that whole, I guess a lot of that stuff James was talking about yesterday in his session about, trees as markers of place. They have their stories and mythologies, and they're part of where we are. And quite often you see the names of streets, don't you? Like, particularly in the modern, there'll be like Oak Tree Lane or something, or and that'll tell you something about the history of that place, or that there was, once an oak tree there till they cut it down and built a housing estate. But yeah. But yeah, so they very much resonate in culture, I think, yeah, in many ways, yeah. I think a lot of the stuff, Common Ground, who James was talking about yesterday, do a lot of work around looking at that, you know, history and what makes places particular. So, yeah, thanks, Joe.
Also, like our paper that we're all writing on and our tables and our houses.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
There's so much wood in this room around me right now. It's unreal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I suppose it's not just the herbivores that are living on them. They are little worlds in themselves, aren't they? And
Absolutely, yeah. I think oak trees support something like about 180 different species of insects, mammals, and this, that, and the other that rely on the oak tree as habitat. So yeah, it's like it's a whole ecosystem within an ecosystem, basically. So yeah.
What about shade? Is that relevant?
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah.
Pictures of, you know, like a field somewhere really hot and arid where there's like one tiny tree and there's like 1,000 sheep and trying to couple
Yeah.
them on the tree because it's the only place that they can get.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So shade, yeah.
I think there's been recently about how those bacteria that are flying around are also really good for our gut health.
Yeah.
Being exposed to those kind of environments because we have such depleted gut bacteria diversity now, aren't we? And it's partly because we're not being exposed to those kind of environments.
Yeah, yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how things unfold about that, because people have been so kind of, for good reason, you know, so kind of adverse to picking up, and you know, people are kind of sanitising their hands every 5 minutes and things, and you think, what, you know, what, how many kind of beneficial bacteria, you know, okay, we don't want the undesirable coronaviruses and things like that, but how many beneficial bacteria are we kind of like not getting into our systems? I think that's something that, you know, long term it'd be interesting to see the effects of that. So definitely, Rachel, yeah. Okay, I'll kind of got a couple more before we move on, but as you can see, you know, basically our passive tree that's I'm just getting a message, my internet connection is unstable, so in a moment I'll probably make someone a co-host if that's okay. Can you still all hear me all right? Yeah? Okay, right, I thought maybe I'd cut out then, because I was getting an internet unstable message. Yeah, so I'll kind of wrap this session up for now. Yeah, so basically, trees, they're carrying out so many functions, so many of these important functions. You know, they're regulating the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the oxygen cycle. They've got a major part to play in the soil food web, and at the same time providing all these products: food, timber, shelter, medicines, and which leads me on to, I was going to briefly, I've already mentioned this publication, Abundant Living in the Coming Age of the Tree by Kathleen Janaway, which was like a really big, when I kind of read that, I guess it was a bit of an epiphany moment for me, because her thing there is like, you know, if we're coming to the end of the age of oil, which, you know, would seem to be the pattern one way or another, either we won't be able to access it, or we won't be able to carry on burning it because we can't, you know, so what's left we leave in the ground. So what follows the age of oil? You know, how do we meet human needs? And Kathleen Janaway very much talks about, you know, or this publication, Abundant Living in the Coming Age of the Tree, about how we'll meet most of our human needs, or, you know, or how trees do in fact meet, you know, nearly all of our human needs, yet actually are carrying out all these other wonderful functions at the same time. And maybe that's, you know, the future we should start seriously thinking about and moving towards. So her well, I'll go back to that one. This little pamphlet, it's in the Dropbox. I have, there is a copy for you to kind of look at, a PDF copy of this. But it is sort of quite low on what this world will, like, we can't know what the coming age of the tree will look like any more than our ancestors would have known what the age of oil looked like. If you go back, I don't know, if you went back a couple of thousand years before agriculture, you wouldn't have been able to envisage what the world looked like, when agriculture began to be developed. And, 150, 200 years ago, there's no way you'd be able to envisage what the world we know looks like, with, the developed urban settlements and big glass skyscrapers and tower blocks and the internet and social media and all this kind of stuff. There's no way, 100 years ago you could know that's what the world would look like. And in the same way, I think there's no way we can know what the age of the tree will look like. It will just be so different to anything we've previously experienced. And so she's quite low on detail in describing what that world will look like. But I think this little book by, I've mentioned Mark Shepherd a couple of times, but this book, Restoration Agriculture, Real World Permaculture for Farmers, he's also moving towards that, by phasing out grain crops and corn, and moving towards a perennial tree-based systems on his land. We're beginning to see, what a tree-based culture might look like. So that's a book I'd kind of recommend having a look at if you get the chance. And I'll come back to him in the next session. But I will wrap up the session now. And stop screen share. So the next session is going to be on forest gardening, which maybe revisit some of the stuff in that last session and puts it in slightly different contexts. But before we move into that, I was thinking it might be good just have a 5-minute break and a walk about and get a drink and see you in 5. Okay, welcome back. So we spent some time there thinking about trees and their wonderful properties and all the wonderful things they provide, and maybe very importantly their role in locking up carbon and taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it back into soils and things like that. Obviously, yeah, to me, in terms of we're thinking about climate change and stuff like that, trees have a really big part to play in that carbon capture role. But we're thinking there, it's huge amounts of trees that we're going to need to be planting to actually start to mitigate against and even perhaps possibly reverse sort of climate change. We're thinking in terms of trillions of trees, basically. So I guess most of us, however, probably don't have the access to the vast areas of land that will be needed for these reforestation programs, or we don't have, we're not like Mark Shepherd in Wisconsin with his 106 acres or whatever, or a lot of us only have maybe like a back garden or an allotment, or maybe not even that, and so don't really have the opportunities for planting all these trees. But I guess we'll have places where we can start to put in, we can start to make a difference by changing our own situation. And I guess to me, forest gardening is one part of that solution. So the next session is going to be thinking about forest gardening, and again I'm going to share the screen, and bear with me a second. Whoops, sorry. Yeah, do that again. Sorry, slight technical glitch there. Okay, so this session going to be introducing forest gardening, a little bit of the history, where the idea of forest gardening came from. Think about what is a forest garden, and then be thinking about design, some of the things we might take into account when we're designing a forest garden. So I guess forest gardening, in short, is a low maintenance, sustainable, plant-based food production and agroforestry system based on woodland ecologies that will incorporate fruit and nut trees, shrubs, herbs, vines and perennial vegetables, which have yields that are directly useful to humans. I think the name can imply forest garden, and I think despite the name, which may imply that they require large amounts of space and take up a lot of land, the principles of forest gardening can be replicated in even the smallest of urban gardens or community spaces, public parks, inner city housing estates, school grounds. I've even seen many forest gardens planted in containers and tubs on tower block balconies. So a little bit of background on forest gardening. This is Robert Hart. So the forest gardening concept was pioneered in the UK during the 1970s by Robert Hart on a small area of land near Wenlock Edge on the Welsh borders in Shropshire. And he began his project with the intention of providing a healthy and therapeutic environment for himself and his brother, who was born with quite severe learning disabilities. And they started as relatively conventional smallholders, growing kind of annual crops. I think they kept a little bit of livestock, that kind of thing. But discovered that maintaining large annual vegetable beds and taking care of an orchard and looking after the livestock were basically tasks that were beyond their strength. And a lot of the smallholding kind of fell into neglect. However, he observed that a small bed of perennial vegetables and herbs that he'd planted up was basically looking after itself with little or no intervention. And furthermore, these plants provided interesting and useful additions to the diet, as well as seeming to promote health and vigour in both body and mind. And he also examined the interactions that take place between plants in natural systems, in particular deciduous woodland in the UK. And also, earlier in his career, he'd been a journalist working for the Reuters news agency, so travelled around the world quite a lot. And he'd seen in Kerala and places like that in southern India what were called home gardens, where a lot of the houses would have their own kind of self-sufficient gardens, providing a lot of their kind of fruit and vegetables that was like around perennial plants and fruit trees and things like that. And thinking about how can that system be adapted in a UK context and modelled on, the ecosystem of deciduous woodland, which is our dominant kind of ecosystem here in the UK. So, yeah, he was very much a pioneer. This is going back to sort of maybe late 1960s, early to mid 1970s. So his was very much a pioneering project at Highwood Hill on Wenlock Edge. This is a photo I took when I visited there in 1997, I think. It's not the greatest photo, but you can get an idea of the plant biodiversity there and the multitude of different productive plants that are growing there. But as I say, he was very much a pioneer, so he tried a lot of things, a lot of experiments. A lot of things worked really well, but also there were a number of things that kind of maybe didn't work so well. So there was a lot to be learned from his failures as well as his successes. And I think the ideas were, those original ideas around forest gardening were developed by Martin Crawford, who founded the Agroforestry Research Trust in Dartington, South Devon. It's in the grounds of Dartington College, and he set up like a trial forest garden plot there where he was trying different experiments, and I think he was keeping a lot more kind of data and a lot more kind of controlled experiments and seeing what things went well together and spacing, trying different spacings between the trees and keeping a lot more kind of records and observational notes. So I think Martin Crawford very much moved on a lot of Robert Hart's ideas and developed them. And that's a place that's very worth visiting if ever you get a chance down there. I think he does tours and things like that. So it's, so I guess they were two of the main pioneering projects of forest gardening. But I think now it's become quite a, the idea has been replicated all over the place now. There are lots and lots and lots of forest gardens all over the place. This was the one at Main Project Gardens. This is Ian Solomon Cowell's place that spoke earlier on the course, KMT Freedom Teacher. This is the back of his house, which is just basically a standard suburban kind of council house, social housing type house in South London, where he's taken the back garden, and some of it is created this little forest garden area, so you can see all the different forest garden plants in there. So yeah, it's very much a concept that's spreading. I feel it's an idea whose time has come in a way, forest gardening. So what are some of the potential benefits of forest gardening? Healthy and nutritious food, obviously. All the different fruits and nuts and berries and perennial salad plants that we could be growing. And returning again to Mark Shepherd, who sort of did some calculations on his own, the guy who wrote the Restoration Agriculture book, where he converted land, degraded land that had previously grown monoculture crops, and compared the outputs in terms of kilocalories that land produces. So as a monoculture, he reckoned that an acre of his land growing corn and nothing else could potentially produce 13 million kilocalories of food, which looks pretty impressive. But then when we factor in what he calls trophic loss, which is the fact that most of that corn would then be fed to animals, which have a really inefficient conversion rate of calories to, or energy to, plant energy to animal biomass. There's a massive amount of most of that energy, most of those kilocalories are lost in that conversion process. And then when we also factor in the energy inputs to actually grow that corn in terms of the fuel for the tractors and stuff, or other ways that fuel might be used, the factoring in the fertilizers that needed to be brought in, and the energy that gone into producing those fertilizers, and similarly the pesticides to keep that system functioning, or to make sure those crops are successful. Fertilizers have to be applied, pesticides have to be applied. We're actually losing 10 million kilocalories. So what our output is, or what's his name? Mark Shepard's output was actually closer to 3 million kilocalories, which is quite a loss really within that system. And then he's compared to a polyculture, the same acre of land on his site, where on this polyculture he'd planted 86 chestnut trees, 34 apple trees, 208 hazels, 416 raspberries and 120 grapes. The total output is 4.5 million kilocalories. So not as impressive our initial figure as 13 million, but once you've factored in the trophic loss and the fuel and the fertiliser and the pesticides, it's actually quite a bit up on the 3 million kilocalories. When you consolidate the total number of kilocalories. This figure excludes, so if he also included, because he does, unfortunately, he keeps pigs and turkeys on his agroforestry system. If you factored in the meat and the fungi, that'd be an additional million kilocalories. But I still think 4.5 is a pretty impressive figure. So looking at what the potential in terms of food, healthy and nutritious food, forest gardening and agroforestry systems could be outputting, there's a lot of potential there, I think. So healthy and nutritious food is one of the primary reasons to think about kind of forest gardening or food forest systems. And the environmental and ecological benefits, wildlife habitat, biodiversity, all that stuff we thought about with the in the tree session before, clean air, helping to restore the water courses, all manner of environmental and ecological benefits, all those earth care benefits. And as again came up in the tree session, all those benefits around health, spirit and well-being. I'm not sure how you quantify that, but definitely there's something about forest gardens, the forest garden environment that's just really, it's just a nice place to be, I think. And yeah, I think, and a lot of people do find them, spiritually very kind of enriching places, and very much, they have a lot of therapeutic value as well, I think. Good place for sort of just relaxing and chilling out, meditation. So all those benefits as well. And which again, and community development. A lot of forest gardens that are set up are very much, community projects. This one was actually a forest garden that in North London that used to be at the back of a nursery school, a kindergarten in Crouch End, maintained by a group called Nature Wise, and that's very much, people would come and everyone would participate. So it's very much about community development and everybody being involved and co-creating and maintaining this community forest garden. Education and learning, they're great, in schools. That last one, that actually was, let's say, at the back of a school in North London. I think they're a great place for learning, for children to find out about nature. Perfect, if you're involved with forest schools, working with kids. Great place, great thing for young people to find out about nature. You can incorporate all of the elements of the national curriculum, I think, or any sort of learning curriculum into another output of a forest garden. Economic and livelihood. In addition to, the obvious thing, if you're producing a surplus of fruit or whatever, that's something you might be able to kind of sell, or there's all kinds of other products that can come from the forest garden. This particular picture here, we were doing apple pressing, and so of course that's kind of quite a high value, quite a premium product that you can sell locally. And also some of it we were making into cider, which again is very much a valuable commodity that could potentially, contribute to some sort of livelihood. And all manner of other forest garden products that maybe we'll talk about in the next session. So yeah, definitely can contribute to economic and livelihood. And of course, carbon capture and soil building, which we went into in a bit more depth in the last session. But that is very much, okay, so one, if you've got a small back garden and you create a little forest garden in your back garden, or a community garden, or your allotment, that's not going to make a huge difference in terms of carbon capture. But imagine if hundreds of people started to do this, and those hundreds of people became thousands of people, and then those thousands of people became millions of people, and when these forest gardens were just sort of appearing all over the place, in the urban environments, all sorts of places, then that starts to make a real difference, I think, to the number of trees that are getting into ground, the number of mycorrhizal associations that are happening, and that starts to make a real difference in terms of carbon capture. So yeah, I think forest gardens do have a part to play in all that. But yeah, still haven't really got to the question of what is a forest garden. So, what is a forest garden? And I'm going to answer that question by telling a story. And the story I'm going to tell is the story of succession. And so imagine this line here represents bare soil. So maybe it's an allotment somewhere that's been growing vegetables, and then the ground has been completely bare, cleared and bared, so there's just bare soil. And then for one reason or another, that person abandons that allotment and doesn't come back. Or imagine it's a field that's been used for agricultural use, it's been ploughed, and again, for some reason it's just neglected. So it's just bare soil, basically. And thinking about what's going to happen to this bare soil over the next few years if it's just left alone and there's no intervention from people. So, first thing that happens, there's this saying that nature abhors a vacuum. So what will happen is ground cover will start to establish very quickly. Things like fast-growing, short-lived plants like chickweed. I guess people are familiar with chickweed. It will very, very quickly spread and cover any soil that's just left bare. Grasses will start to grow in there quickly, any grass seeds that are in there. So very quickly this ground cover layer will start to spread to basically protect the bare soil. Think of if you was to cut yourself or graze if you graze your knee or something, the first thing that happens, it scabs over in there. It's so, the body's defense system just covers that as quickly as possible. Clotted blood just covers it to stop disease getting in, to stop blood loss, all sorts of reasons why, it's important to protect bare soil just as much as our own skin. So yeah, ground cover will begin to establish very, very quickly, and then our herbaceous plants will begin to arrive that tend to be deep rooted, a lot of them, So things like dandelion, sorrel, dock, and they're beginning to, because they're deeper rooted, they're beginning to kind of mine nutrients from lower down in the soil, down in the subsoil, and they're drawing those nutrients up. So those nutrients are being made available to the plants that are growing on the surface. And then our next layer, or next sort of thing that's in this story of succession, we begin to our sort of shrubby plants. So bushy shrubby plants. They've got a fire form, maybe buddleia might be a kind of shrub that starts to appear. You know, the butterfly bush has those beautiful purple flowers that attract butterflies. And in the UK, one of our classic kind of shrub or scrub layer plants that will colonise new ground or newly cleared ground will be bramble. That spreads very quickly and will colonise and spread. And because the bramble has these kind of spiky stems and thorns, they're providing some protection for seeds that might be germinating in the soil that otherwise mightn't be eaten by deer or rabbit or other predatory things. So our kind of small trees begin to appear in the landscape. What we call our pioneer trees, things that are, you know, say the seeds may have been in the ground already, or they may have been dropped by a bird or something like that. Because they've got that protection from the bramble and other shrubby plants, they get an opportunity to germinate and begin to grow. And so things like rowan, the mountain ash, silver birch, those sort of coloniser plants, they tend to be small, pioneer trees, tend to be quite small. They don't grow that large, and they tend to be quite short-lived as well. They don't live all that long, and they tend to be kind of softwoods as well. And over time, these will give way to our larger trees, what we call the climax species. So they're larger trees that tend to be longer lived. So things like oak here in the UK, chestnut. Yeah, and these aren't hard and fast boundaries. You know, there can be a lot of crossover. Things like ash might be, it's a pioneer species, but it can grow into a larger, longer lived tree. But so it's not hard and fast boundaries, but this is kind of the pattern. So we're going from bare soil to ground cover to herbaceous plants to sort of scrubby, woody shrubs to small pioneer trees that are building up the soil fertility and making the ecosystem more complex, finally giving way to our kind of canopy, larger canopy trees, our climax species. So that is kind of the pattern of succession. There may be, you know, the time scale for this, it might be kind of quite rapid. This might happen over, you know, 10 to 15 years, or it might take a lot longer depending on all sorts of environmental factors and stuff. But it's a common pattern that you see in many ecosystems. And we'll see that it also kind of mimics that woodland edge ecosystem, where you kind of got this curve going from, you know, if you imagine thinking about the woodland story or the woodland visualization, and there's a bit about, you know, when you're outside the woodland and you're transitioning into the woodland. As you walk into the woodland, you might often see this moving from kind of grassland to sort of like some herbaceous plants at the edge and some bushes and shrubs. And slowly you're kind of going into this, you know, before we actually get into the woodland, you go through these other stages. And I guess in forest gardening, what we're doing, we're thinking about all these stages in the succession process, and we're thinking about how can we actually replicate and maintain those in with plants and trees that are directly useful to human beings, and how do we actually maintain all those different stages of that succession story. So thinking about what we might be growing in the forest garden, in our kind of these different levels or stories of the woodland or the woodland edge. So we might be replacing our larger trees with things like apples, pears, cherries. They won't tend to be, of the size of kind of oak trees and chestnuts and those sorts of things, but they will tend to be our kind of larger specimens of apples, pears and cherries. And so they'd be our level one, or story one, if you like, in terms of stories. Our next will be our smaller trees, our pioneer species. So things like hazel, which tend to be smaller, and I'll put apples, etc. on dwarfing rootstocks. Would anyone like to, when I say dwarfing rootstocks, what do I mean by that? Anyone familiar with that?
It's when we graft our apple on some kind of tree that is much smaller, so it will not grow so large. Maybe like
basically, yeah. So yes, so trees, fruit trees, they're like human beings in many ways, in that they reproduce by sexual reproduction, and so just like us, we are a combination of the genes of our mother and the genes of our father combined into a whole new, think of it, a pack of cards shuffled into a whole new sequence. And so just the same way, if an apple tree has produced a pip from a fruit that's produced by sexual reproduction, and that tree plant that tree and it grows from a pip, it will have some of the characteristics of the female parent, it will have some of the characteristics of the male parent, plus it will have a whole bunch of its own characteristics, which is absolutely brilliant in terms of genetic diversity and expanding the diversity of the gene bank. Not so brilliant in terms of actually the predictability of the fruit that tree is going to produce. And so we might have two very delicious apple varieties that cross-pollinate, and the apple they produce might not be very nice at all. It might, not taste very nice, might be very small and not at all palatable. So to make sure that we actually can produce the same apple as the parent tree, we need to actually take a cutting from that tree. So imagine we've got, I'm just trying to think of a random tree, a Cox's orange pippin, say, and this is a Cox's orange pippin, we cut a twig from that tree, which we then call a scion, S-C-I-O-N, that's our cutting. And so this will be, the fruit that this scion produces will be predictable in terms of the apple that it's going to produce. It will produce more Cox's orange pippin fruits. And then, as Natalia said, what we then do is take a cutting from another tree, which we call the rootstock, and that is going to be very predictable in terms of the size of the tree, how big the tree is going to grow to, its disease resistance, how much water it needs, and all those sorts of things. And there's a whole load of these different trees that are grown for their rootstocks, and many of them are in what's called the malling series or the M series. So quite often you'll see, if you look in, go to a plant nursery or tree nursery, you'll see that this fruit is grown on an M rootstock. So very, very briefly, the malling series was developed at the Malling Horticultural Research Station around the turn of the 20th century. So around 1912, the early 1900s. And very briefly, so if you're on an M25 rootstock, you're going to get a full-size tree. M106 is kind of small tree or orchard size, standard size for an orchard. M9 would be dwarfing, and M27 would be very dwarfing, so might be suitable for a very small garden, that kind of thing. So you've got our scion, you've got your rootstock, and you're basically grafting them together. So you're combining the two, and then you kind of wrap kind of tape, special tape you can get, or I just use carrier bags, actually, just torn up carrier, I had to do it in a hurry, and so just all I had to hand was a carrier bag. So anything that's basically stopping this graft from drying out and kind of diseases or fungal infections from getting in there. And what will happen, the two will actually fuse together over time, and then you've got your tree for planting out. So yeah, so these might be our smaller trees that are growing on dwarfing rootstocks to control their size. And our next layer will be our currants and berries, our things like gooseberries, blackcurrants, those sorts of things. And then we've got our herbaceous layer, where we'd be substituting things like dock with edible perennials, comfrey, which, well, that's not so edible actually, but that's part of the maintaining the fertility cycle. So comfrey you might have in there, sorrel, which is edible, all manner of other kind of edible herbaceous plants. And then finally we have our ground cover layer, where we'd be putting in things like low growing, spreading things like mints, lemon balm, wild strawberry. And the main aim again there is to protect the soil, basically, so that's a soil covering. So you've got all those layers of the woodland edge there, or the succession story, replicated in our kind of forest garden there. And there's a couple of other additional layers that we would be considering. There is the rhizosphere, or the root zone. There are things like Jerusalem artichoke, which is a perennial thing which you might be growing in a forest garden for its sort of root crops. But by and large, as we're trying to minimise soil disturbance, and we're not wanting to be digging things up all the time, because that's sort of defeating the object, there's not that many root crops we'd really be considering. But I think the rhizosphere, we're also thinking about, the structures of the underground economy, as they say, and the fungal layer, and what's happening with those mycorrhizal associations and those kind of things. So considering that, the rhizosphere, or the root zone, or the underground zone. And the last layer in the classic forest garden model would be climbers, so vertical things that grow up surfaces, or might be growing up trees, possibly things like grapes, figs I've seen in some sort of forest garden situations. I have actually seen runner beans, you know, in the Robert, when I went to Robert Hart's garden, he was actually growing runner beans up into his apple tree. So he'd had these poles around the tree situated every couple of feet apart, and actual runner beans going up into the trees, which looked really weird because you sort of look in the trees and think, oh, I thought that was an apple tree, but there's like beans growing in the tree. But but it's something to, you know, consider as another layer. So that was my kind of sketchbook version of the succession story, and I guess that is probably the diagram, the 7 layers of the forest garden, that is probably quite a familiar image where you can maybe see those layers a little bit more clearly. The canopy, larger fruit trees, low level dwarf fruit trees, the shrub layer, currant bush there, black currant bush, herbaceous layer, we've got some herbaceous plants growing there, and then you've got the soil surface, wild strawberry or something like that growing on the wild on the surface, our root layer and our potential vertical layer. So that's hopefully an explanation of what is a forest garden. And where are we at? Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick time check. Okay, yeah, I'm going to get into thinking about design, but I thought it might be good to take a break here, maybe split this session into 2 halves, and that might be, otherwise it's a bit of an information dump to all be hitting you with at once. So if people are happy, I'm going to take a halfway break there, and oops, come out of, I seem to have lost the little thing that, don't seem to be able to come out slide share thing. What happens if I press that? That's it. Cool. Okay, I'll stop the share there. It is 2 o'clock, so if we have a break until 2:30, and then we'll come back and think about designing. Now we know what forest garden is and why they're so wonderful, and a little bit about their history, we'll actually think about how you can start thinking about making your own forest garden. So see you in half an hour.
I had to put my dressing gown on because I'm freezing.
Say that again.
I've had to put my dressing gown on because I'm freezing.
Oh right, okay. Oh, I'm really warm. I had to take my hoodie off because I was too hot.
Apologies for my informal attire, but that's the benefit of working from home, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Dressing gown on.
Yeah. So how are you keeping? Haven't seen you for ages.
Nick said he saw you the other day down the Mile and a Third.
I saw Nick. Yeah, he was with another lady.
You're probably not supposed to tell me that.
Right, okay.
No, that's Tina. That's fine.
Yeah. We've met. I've met Tina before, haven't I?
I think you probably have.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's one of his old friends from when he used to. Oh, I think she's involved in the Rochford Beer Festival.
Okay.
So she kind of knows the same crowd of people. She knows the lads that run the Mile and a Third and stuff.
Yeah.
This is coming out of here. It is right. Okay. So what's going on? Not a lot really. No. Nothing very exciting. Going out with Matt Mint on Thursday, so it'd be nice to see him.
Oh yeah.
We're going to the Cricketers. There's a Dr. Feelgood tribute on.
Is it on Thursday? Oh,
Thursday the 2nd.
I wonder if that'll happen actually, because they cancelled next Saturday's gig that I was going to because of this new Omicron variant or something. So,
well, they might.
I think they're being super cautious at the moment.
That's the Cricketers generally.
Yeah. Dean Ward. Yeah, it's Dean Ward who organised the gig and.
Oh yeah, I was thinking of going to that, the Conflict one.
Conflict, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been postponed. So.
Here we go again.
Yeah. Never mind.
I just had my booster this week.
I've got mine Wednesday. It's Wednesday coming.
Fun times.
Yes.
Oh well. So I might not be seeing Matt on Thursday then.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Just have to go with the flow, don't you? I think that's
Yeah. Oh, that's another thing. I'm supposed to finally, having been trying to get into chaplaincy for such a long time, I've got a
Yeah.
prisoner to see up at Chelmsford Prison
all right.
on the 10th, who apparently identifies as a humanist. The prison didn't really understand that it's not just humanists that can talk to me, it's anyone that's non-religious
All
can
right,
talk to
okay,
me instead of talking to the religious chaplain. But he said, oh, we've got a prisoner now that's a humanist, so he can talk to
Right.
you.
All right.
Any of them can talk to me.
You have them all pretending to be humanists so they can talk
Well,
to you.
not a lot of people know what humanist is. You know, it's
No.
just a society of people that are atheist. But yeah, so that'll be interesting. Anyway, going to meet a finally get to do some chaplaincy for the prison.
Oh yeah. Oh, good luck with that.
Still trying to get into the hospice, but I don't know why such a long time is being taken over sorting out DBS paperwork.
Oh, well, I suppose maybe they haven't got the.
Well, I think their volunteer,
That.
yeah, their volunteer coordinator has left. She's now working for TrustLink, so that probably doesn't help.
Right.
Got a cat joining me today.
Oh yeah, are we gonna have a dog on your seat?
There's a dog as well. She's behind. She's hiding. Back there. There's the small dog, and this one's Penny. Penny likes to come to meetings.
Is Penny new? I don't think I've seen.
No, she's one of my
heard
older
Penny
ones.
before. Oh really? You don't mention Penny that often.
Oh no, Penny.
It's mainly Brian Blessed who you talk about, isn't it?
Yeah, because he's the naughtiest. Are you going to wave? You sometimes wave, don't you?
No.
Sometimes wave. Sometimes the little paw comes.
Okay.
You going to wave? There you go.
Look at that, right on cue.
Sometimes she does this whole kind of jazz hands thing, which is quite
Oh,
fun.
we should like that. We're always doing jazz hands on this course, so.
She likes to come to my meetings. She's funny. Whenever she hears me talking, she has to come and join in. She's always got a lot to add to the conversation, haven't you?
I remember when you did this session, was it last year or the year before? And everyone went off for a break, and you left your camera on. And when everyone came back, there was like just your dog looking into the screen.
Yeah, she's usually, she'll hold fort for me. Lexi, what are you doing? She's not been well. She's had pancreatitis, but she's getting a lot better now. She's been out for a walk today, and she seems to be eating again. So
Good.
yeah. Anyway,
it looks like people are sort of drifting back, so I'll turn the recording on again. I think hopefully I did. I've got to start it again, so I can't really check that till later. Okay, so welcome back everyone, and I shall hand you over to Sherry. I've already kind of used a bit of her time, so I'm already slightly overrunning. So I'll let Sherry introduce herself, and I'll straight over to you, Sherry.
have we got till 4:30 then, Graham?
Yeah, we normally finish. We sometimes overrun a little bit, but yeah, it's good because people sort of have to be at other places and have to go and things.
Yeah,
so.
Got things to do.
Yeah.
So I'm Sherry, and I've known Graham for quite a long time. Back when we both used to work for the council, I think.
Yeah.
And we've done some courses together to try and encourage and motivate people to think about what they could do within their communities. So combining appreciative inquiry and permaculture. And kind of what I do to make a living is all sorts of engagement work. So I help people to have conversations with one another to make things happen. So the day job at the moment is doing patient engagement for a CCG in Southwest London. Lots about getting people's stories heard, really, is what I help to do. And appreciative inquiry is, well, it's lots of things, but it's one mechanism for helping people to develop their own futures based on sharing stories. So it's quite philosophical, but where it fits in with what you're doing with your projects and permaculture is, well, it's a couple of things actually that will hopefully become apparent. It's thinking about the strengths that you can bring to bear to overcome any challenges that you have, but it's also thinking about how you might bring in the voices of your communities and how you might help motivate people around you to get involved in what you're wanting to make happen. So if you're looking to do something that's on a grander scale, where you do want a little bit of buy-in from people in neighborhoods, people in communities, then it's a way of bringing people together. So what I'm going to go through with you today is just a little bit about what AI is and the philosophy of it and the psychology of it, because it's all about positive thinking and moving in a positive direction. And then we're going to do a little bit of practice of how we kind of share those stories, because we do it by interviewing one another. I have updated my slides, Graham. Am I able to share my screen?
You should be able to. I'm just going to make you
Yeah,
co-host
looks like I
just
can.
in
Yeah,
case.
looks like I can. Let me just righty-ho.
I've made you co-host as well, so.
Okie dokie. Right, let's just see if this is going to work for us. Your screen. Right. Okay, let's see if I can put it on slideshow. Right. Can you see that okay? Yeah, I can see some nods and things. Yeah, I've just sexed them up a bit, Gray, and put some pictures on that. Not too many slides though, because appreciative inquiry is lots about talking and talking to one another. So I want to leave some time for us to do that. But shush. This is why I've got the headphones on. I hope you're not hearing too much barking. That's the neighbour from upstairs. You know him. You see him all the time. You don't have to bark at him. No. So in a nutshell, this is what appreciative inquiry is. Learning from what works well. We don't use words like obstacles and barriers in appreciative inquiry. We just look at what works and how we can do more of that. So it's a very positive approach to whatever we're trying to do. So we're looking to understand what the conditions of success look like so we can replicate them. It's kind of allied, if any of you have been involved in research of any sort, it's allied to a research technique called positive deviance, where if lots of things are failing, but one thing is going well, despite seeming to have the same conditions, you kind of interrogate that and look at what's happening there. If one family is thriving when everyone around them seems to be really struggling, yet the conditions appear to be the same, you have conversations with that family to understand what they're doing differently and how things are working well for them. So that's kind of where we are with appreciative inquiry. We're looking at what works and what we can learn from that. The fundamental aspect of it, which aligns it nicely with permaculture, is what brings life. What brings life to you? What brings life to your community? What brings life to your project? So that's the central tenet to what appreciative inquiry is, looking to what brings us alive, or an organisation alive, or a community alive. Connecting people through storytelling, as I've already said, and appreciating that in any group of people that's trying to do something, every single person is unique and a unique blend of experience, knowledge and skills, and everyone has something that they can contribute. And the more we can get our heads together and share that learning and share that knowledge, the more we can achieve together. I'm sure you will have heard various quotes about that if you want to go faster, go alone. If you want to go further, go together. And I just finish with this quote here, that the most successful organizations align their strengths in a way that make weaknesses irrelevant. That's by Peter Drucker, who was a kind of rewrote the book on management consulting and organizational development and things. And he was also something of a philosopher. But I really like that quote. And I talk about that in my work. And I talk about that when I'm dealing with communities. We don't need to worry about what we're not so good at. We just complement one another with our strengths. And that's the way we can make things happen. So that's it in a summary. There is a cycle to running through a project using the appreciative approach. I won't spend too long on this because this is something that you can go through over, well, there's a week's training course that takes you through the cycle, or you can do what I've done and spend about 8 years learning it. So I'll only just touch on it today. So you start by deciding what it is you want to learn about. That's your definition phase. Discovery is the fun part that we're going to do a little bit on today, which is where you have lots of conversations with anybody that's got something to contribute about what good looks like. Dreaming is lots of fun. When Graham and I do a more full course on this, that's usually when we get out all our creative materials and our Legos and everything, and we get people developing their grand visions of what they want to make happen together. And as you'll know, if you've done that kind of thing, and you may well have done with your projects about visioning where you want to go, once you've articulated a vision and it's very detailed, it does motivate you more to want to make it happen because it comes much more real for you. And then design and deliver are the obvious project planning type things of how am I going to make this happen? And then do it now, get on and do it. And we always, whenever I'm teaching people appreciative inquiry, always do a little bit of do it now. Get started, whatever it is you're wanting to achieve, no matter how big it is, what small thing you can do right this second to get moving, because we want things to happen quickly. And then drum and dance is the last part. Celebrate everything you've achieved. And depending on different cultures in the world where they use this technique, they do that literally. When I was lucky enough to go to a conference about appreciative inquiry in Nepal, there were some delegations there in their workshops where we started with a song and we ended in a song, because that was part of something that's very cultural. And I'd like to see us be a bit more like that over here, really. So a little bit about the philosophy. When we train to be appreciative inquiry practitioners, we spend a lot of time really thinking about what these things mean and how people see the world around them and how people understand their own truth. Because obviously reality is just down to what we perceive personally. So everyone's reality looks different. So there's lots of interesting things that we consider when we're thinking about how we work with people, how we connect people, and how we bring people together and listen to their stories. So obviously appreciative inquiry is poetic because it is about learning through stories. It's in its way a form of research, a form of learning, but it's very human. It's very about listening to what people's stories and experiences are and how we can use those stories to build better futures. Wholeness. In appreciative inquiry, we try to let go of concepts of good and bad because that's subjective. We try to acknowledge and respect whatever perspective people bring to the table and that their reality is very real for them, and try not to be judgy about what's right or wrong, what's good or bad, because that depends on where you're standing. And it is about, if we're working on a project where we do want to involve others, it's thinking about, and who else has something to contribute here? Let's hear from every voice. Heliotropic, one of my favorite words, just like the plants in the picture, we grow towards the light, and we do that as people as well. We will move in the direction of our most imaginative ideas and our most aspirational visions. We're drawn towards that. So if you have that positive mindset, if you have that vision of where you want to go, it will help you kind of draw people along with you on that journey towards the light. That's where people want to go, especially at the moment. You know, people want hope. People want to know there's something good out there that they can get involved in. And I think people will be very keen to do that. Social construction, that's going back to that idea about reality. We create it ourselves through the conversations that we have. So we can create a narrative that says these things are possible, and not everything that you read in the newspapers is the right truth. We can create different realities by talking together. And anticipatory, that's a bit like heliotropic, really. If we have an idea of where we want to get to and a clear vision, it makes it easier to go in that direction. If we anticipate good things, then it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy and will make good things happen. And simultaneity is another word that I really enjoy. Things change the moment you ask your first question. First conversation you have with somebody, what we're doing now is changing the future. So again, be mindful. As appreciative inquiry practitioners, because of this, we're always mindful in what we ask people and how we ask it. Because if we ask people, tell us everything that's wrong with this town, tell us all the problems that you see in Southend, that will start people into a negative mindset of complaining and feeling like everything is just dreadful. And before long, people will feel despondent and they won't have much motivation to take action. But if you ask people, what do you most love about living here? What do you most value about your community? What are your best memories here? Then that will take people in their minds to a really positive place, and that will remind them that good things are possible, and it will help us to go on a more positive journey together. So that's really, really quickly the kind of philosophy that we train in as appreciative inquiry practitioners that helps us to have positive conversations with communities to help motivate people to take positive action. But it doesn't just have to be with communities. You can use this in one-to-one coaching, and you can also use it with yourself and your project to think about, how am I thinking about this? How am I approaching this? So I'm just going to stop sharing briefly, just in case people have got any comments so far before I get on to the next bit, so I can see all your faces. So have anybody got any comments or questions about that really quick, very wordy run through? Quiet.
Oh, just wow. Never even heard of it, but I'm already like amazed.
Well, that's good. That's all very positive. Yeah, it's something. I went on a course in 2008 when I was working at the council, and my boss was meant to go on this course because I was way too junior for this kind of stuff. But he said, this sounds like your bag, Sherry. It's all very positive, so you can go on this course. And it was a week-long course taught by this wonderful woman that was a former civil rights activist. She was I think she was in her early 70s when I met her, called Jane Watkins. She's one of the people that wrote the book on this, sadly no longer with us. And I just was blown away. I thought, this is world-changing stuff. And there were people on that course that were working with communities in rural India to help them to think about what they could do for themselves to make things better. And there was some lovely stories about women tackling gambling habits in their husbands and working together to improve the lot for their families. And yeah, it can sound, and my director in social care at the time said this to me, it's all very Pollyanna, it's all very rose-tinted glasses. But then I started doing it when we had to do things like bring people with learning disabilities together to talk about what they wanted from services. And I used this approach. What's worked well for you in the past? Tell us a story about that. Tell us a story about a time someone helped you achieve something new. What works well? So once they saw me doing it in action, they realized, actually, this is pretty good. People come along to these sessions, and unlike other council meetings where they might just complain and get very cross about things, now people are thinking, well, actually, there was that time that this went really well, and actually maybe what we could do is, and maybe my vision for where we could go is. So it just changes the whole ambience of the conversations that you have. I'm conscious that I've just rattled through it really quickly so far. So if anybody else wanted to say anything before I move on. Did you want to add anything, Graham? Are you falling asleep there?
No, it's all good. Yeah,
I've heard this so many times. It's heard it so many times.
That's
He's
all right.
probably having a snooze. Right, so the bit I'm going to take you on to And I'll ask for your help with this, Graham, because can we put people in rooms? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Is that right? 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 people on the call, apart from you and I. Oh, you're on mute.
How many people?
We'll put them in pairs. Are we able to do that?
Four groups too. Yeah.
Yeah. In a minute. Cool.
I'll get it ready.
Marvelous. So what we're going to do, I mean, at the heart of appreciative inquiry is talking to one another and learning from our own stories. So what I would do if I had a room full of people is I'd connect them in pairs and get them to spend time listening to each other. So, you know, you might have a whole hour to do this usually, and half an hour each, which sounds like a really long time. But what we're trying to do is not only learn from what each person's experience is, but give them time to bond and give them time to connect. And it's a lovely thing, actually, to have people talking together one-to-one, because very often when you've got a situation where a community of people's coming together, you will have, as you will know, those voices that are more confident, that have more to say, that will not necessarily in a bad way dominate the conversation, because they probably have got lots of really good stuff to contribute, but it can mean that other voices somewhat get left behind, the quieter voices, and they're likely to have something really valuable to say as well. So if we give everyone the opportunity to have a voice, then we can get a really rich load of insight from everyone in the room. Although I have learned, if you do this in practice, if you bring together a load of people, make sure they have permission to not join in. Because I kind of see this as a really lovely, positive thing, but some people feel really put on the spot by it and really intimidated by thinking, oh God, I've got to come up with something and I don't have anything. So I always say now, don't worry if you haven't got a story to share. If you're happy to sit and listen, write some notes, maybe as you're listening to the other person, that's fine. And then if you find that a story comes to you, you can share it, or you can just sit out and sit quietly and just write your own thoughts. So I always give people permission to not take part. And that's true of everything that we do. Whenever we get to like the creative bit and everything, I always give people permission to sit out quietly if they want to, recognizing that people have different ways that they want to contribute. So anyway, I'm going to share my screen again and talk you through this interview bit. Okay. Right. Oh no, that's the next bit. We might not have time for that bit. Hopefully you can see that. So there are 3 flavors of question that we usually get people talking about during what we call discovery interviews.
I'm not sure if your slideshow's moved on actually.
Oh no, it
I'm
says
getting
it's paused.
The screen I'm getting is kind of your
Oh, okay.
what do you call it? Your PowerPoint as opposed to
resume.
Yeah, that's
share.
I think that's what you need. That's it.
Have you got it now?
Yeah.
Marvelous. Thank you for that. It said at the top paused, but I didn't see that bit. So thank you, Graham. Right. So there are 3 flavors of question that if you're designing these are sort of interview protocols, if you did want to do this with a group, the first question is always tell us a story about. So that's looking at the past. So if you've got a particular project that you're working on, you might say, tell us a story about a time where you grew something. Tell us a story about a time where you were involved in a community project, anything that might be relevant to what you're doing that you could learn from. So you get people to just go back in their minds to something, even if it's quite a small example, that worked well. And you kind of just get them to talk about why that's a great story. So you can understand when things work, why do they work? So learning from the past is always the first thing we ask people, and that's the most important part of the conversation. And the second question is usually about them personally. So that's about you in the present. And the reason that we ask people to reflect on their strengths and their passions is because if we are doing something with a group of people, we don't want them to come along thinking they're going to give lots of ideas, then we're going to go off and make it happen for them. We want them to understand that they're contributing to this, that they've got something to do as well. So I always encourage people to think about what they love to do, what their strengths are, what their passions are, because whatever actions come out of our conversations, we're hoping that they'll do some of that too. They're not just here to tell us what they think we should do. Graham and I have got lots of experience of people coming up with good ideas and then expecting we're going to do it for them. I'm sure you have as well. Oh, you're a very active person. I'll just come to you with all my ideas about you should just do this and you should just do that. No. We're going to do it together or it's not going to happen. And then the third one is the future looking one. What are your goals, wishes, and hopes for the future? Now, that can sometimes be where the more negative stuff comes in, because people might see something that really needs improving, and that will be their wish for the future. So there's past, present, and future. So something about what we can learn from your past, something about who you are right now and what you can bring to the current challenge, and what's your wish for the future. So what I'm going to invite you to do is just do a really, really simple part of this, going back to the heart of AI, which is what brings you to life. So I just want you to have a conversation with your partner, sharing a story about a time you felt fully alive. When you've really felt like that, what have you been doing? What is it that really makes you feel fully alive? Whatever that means to you, there's no one way of that making sense. So just share that story if anything does come to mind for you about what you were doing. And then if time permits, because that first question might take up all the time we have, but if time permits, you can also think about what are your passions and skills that might have come out of that story actually, because you tend to be fully alive when you're doing your things you most love, and they tend to be the things you're most good at. And then thirdly, where do you hope the current chapter of your story is taking you? What's your wish for yourself right now? It's a good time of the year to be reflecting on that. So those are the three things. Story when you felt most alive, what you're really passionate about, where you hope your current chapter is taking you. So I'm going to stop sharing. Does that all make sense to people? I'll just put those questions in the chat, but I think you've got them. Story about a time you felt fully alive, and what your passions and skills are. And then the third one, where is your current chapter taking you? Right, so if Graham can put people in pairs.
Yeah, I shall do that.
And now we haven't got terribly long, because ideally I'd give you, well, blooming ages to do this. But you've only going to have until 20 past. So that's 23 minutes. So if you can manage your time together so that you take it in turns, usually one talks, one listens, and then you swap.
Would it be useful if I send a message or you send a message when it's halfway through, half time?
Yeah, if we can easily do that, Graham. If we can just send a little ping to people.
Yeah.
So yeah, if Graham can put you in breakout rooms together.
Yeah, the breakout, it's all good to go.
Any questions before we go? Oh, I think people are good.
Okay, off to the breakout rooms. Hello.
Hello.
Right, I'm going to pause the record. Yep.
just wait for everyone to rejoin us.
Another 19 seconds. Let's close this. There we go. People are drifting back.
I keep this awful background, by the way, in the hopes it might shame me to actually get around to doing my decorating. Which has not happened yet in 14 years. So,
I thought you bought dinosaur wallpaper.
oh, the
Is that
dinosaur
somewhere
wallpaper's
else?
in my bedroom. I've got
right.
Lima wallpaper and paint, dark green paint, and Lima wallpaper for the lounge. But yeah, that's just kind of sitting in the hallway.
Okay. Oh, looks like everyone's back now. So,
I often
okay.
like the thought of doing things more than I like the actual doing things. Welcome back, everyone. So Graham, yeah, in terms of a wrap up then, do you want just a couple of minutes of feedback from that activity and then a wrap up of the day?
I thought perhaps we could integrate it. Perhaps people could, for their feedback, could be their wrap up of the day, maybe. You know, a little summary. Well, it's your session. I thought I did think rather than you do your feedback and then we have another closing circle, maybe we could integrate the two. Otherwise, it tends to overrun a bit. Does that sound all right to you?
Well, yeah.
All these things we should have discussed while the breakout rooms were in progress, but never mind.
I'm just thinking if they might have something else they want to say about the rest of the session up till this point as well.
Okay. Yep.
And we'll see what you feel you want to come up with. So basically, we've got 5 minutes left. So I appreciate this is you know, a really quick thing at the end of your day. But if we do want to just go around, and if there's something that came up for you from those stories that you would like to share, then that would be lovely to hear. Or if you've got anything else that you want to say as your reflection for this session today, then I guess that will cover our kind of closing circle. So should we do you do the thing, Graham, where I say a name and then they speak and then they invite the next person?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, and if obviously mindful of time, so I'm sure you'll have lots you want to say, but we'll need to keep it fairly brief. So I'm going to start with Natalia.
Hey. So it was very good to learn more about Laura. It was some of the stories that she was telling me was very inspiring. Like when she went to Eco Village in Portugal, and I was kind of like, I want to go there. Yeah, and the way she thinks that about gardening as like creative process. But she talks about music and drawings and after like gardening. And I was never, yeah, I thought, but for me, gardening more like meditation. And for her, it's more like form of creativity. It's very interesting. And I learned, can we share what other people, Laura, are you okay? Me sharing about your future? Yeah, okay. So, and I want to read her book very, very much. Yeah, because she wants to write very interesting book about future and permaculture, future food forest. Yeah.
So if you choose a person to pass to, Natalia.
I will pass to Laura.
Yeah, I think we had a really nice conversation, really nice to get to know each other better. And yeah, you told me about how you got really excited about finding some people in a space camp, some kids, and were able to convince some of them to go vegan. And you had the skill to do that, and that you were really nice feeling about that. And yeah, about getting hope from this course and all the new things learning here that are kind of new, and finding people in your environment who are were open to it. So yeah, I think it was really nice to speak to you, and also really nice 2 days, nice course days. So thank you. And I will point to Anne.
It was lovely to get to know Rachel. We seem to have very similar things, but also are coming at them in perhaps slightly different ways. We have a love of nature together, and we've both got ideas where we want to perhaps learn from this course and help other people who might want to know how to do the things that we've been learning, and to help them become self-sufficient in the way they live. Is that all right, Rachel? Have I covered it? I've left some for you, I promise. I'll call on Rachel.
Yes, I think there was something really energizing about the sort of talking about the positives, thinking automatically about the positives as opposed to going in with a bit of a whinge. And it was, we were able to sort of drill down and actually think a bit, particularly about what our design projects I think were going to be that we're thinking about, because we've been sort of just thinking about it from a different angle slightly, haven't we, Anne, in this, and just coming up with some ideas for each other, which was really good, because I've been festering in my own pit of doubt about it all, I think, for a bit. So yes, thank you. I'm feeling really positive. What a great way to finish the weekend. So I'm going to pass on to Jo.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I also found it really good to focus on the positives and to have that kind of that sort of loose structure to the process. Also, I think took off the pressure of coming up with this really elaborate kind of story of you could just kind of tell the story in a very simple way, but just having that positive thing in mind helped to just nudge it here and there. So I really enjoyed talking and listening to Irene and sharing each other's stories, and it was good because we were saying, we kind of said to each other at the end, it was quite nice because Irene had some lovely concrete things that she could share with me, and the words that I was kind of using was things like kind of, I hope to live a life of, authenticity and integrity and all that kind of stuff. But learning and listening to someone with very concrete responses to living a life of integrity and was really encouraging and inspiring. So it was great. And so I pass on to Irene.
Thank you, Jo. I was blown away by this because I was listening to her speak, and she's so philosophical and deep, and it was amazing to have my eyes opened in that sense, because I'm such a concrete person. Everything for me, from teaching children, where I needed to be concrete, and teaching adults about helping children and helping them become teacher aides to help children with special needs, had to be so concrete. So my whole thinking philosophy of life is very concrete and very simple. And to have my eyes opened beyond that is just amazing. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I'm going to pass on to Carla.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a really lovely session. Like today, I'm a bit gutted I missed yesterday, but it was really lovely, the pace and the content and all the drawings from Graham, and then to lead into this with you, Sherry, felt really, really lovely and really whole, sort of bringing in the holistic and the practical was really beautiful. And I love the framing of the positive, because I think, especially when we're talking about ourselves and our ideas, especially when you're British, the tendency is to be humble or modest, or, you know, and when that's like completely out of the room, I think it frees us up a lot more. So that was really, really lovely. I also really enjoyed, we started the day with the visualization with Graham in the woodland, you know, and that sort of embodiment practice. So to then finish today with a time when you felt really alive, and that little bit of embodiment as well, definitely gave me a boost. Like, it was a really beautiful way to frame the day, but it has given me more energy, whereas sometimes at the end I'm sitting with a million thoughts and pieces of information. So thank you both for that. And yeah, it was really nice to chat to Dagmar and sort of delve in a little bit to both of our stories. There was definitely overlaps of sort of freedom in nature and letting go, and then for the future proofing, and how they look potentially quite different for both of us. And we both touched on how this course and a few different speakers have helped to shake up a little bit the idea that you must have a 40-acre homestead in order to do something. So yeah, mine was definitely now more thinking about the future here and what that looks like, taking in all this learning. But yeah, it was really, really lovely to end on this and to have time to learn from someone else in the group. So thanks. And Dagmar, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Carla. I think, yeah, I agree with a lot of what Carla and everyone has said today. I really enjoyed the exercise, walking through the word, because as I mentioned to Graham, it's something that I do all the time when I'm stressed. Just imagine myself just walking through the trees with the sun, and it's quite a powerful exercise that takes you away from all the craziness of real life. It was lovely to talk to Carla. She's a very sort of soulful, positive, very kind person. So it was really lovely to talk to her. I feel I'm very black and white, whereas I think Carla is more sort of philosophical. And yeah, I think because we're both on this course, we do have very similar values and hopes for the future. So I think we did overlap quite a lot in our thoughts. And yeah, future proofing was a goal. I think that we felt the way the world's going is something that we probably all need, and how we can sustain ourselves in a world that's sort of falling apart around us, which I suppose is what this course is about, really. So thank you. I've really enjoyed today. I love the forest gardening, and it's been a great weekend. Look forward to the next one. Thank you.
Great, thank you, everybody. That was some really lovely feedback there. Thank you. Yeah, I think we have gone over time, so we'll kind of finish there. Just a couple of very quick things. Next Sunday, I'm just looking at my wall chart here. We have a session on, all being well, we have a session on fungi from Benson Jack, who normally, or Benson Anthony, who normally does a session as part of the, the actual weekends as opposed to the guest sessions, but for one reason or another, because he's really busy doing what he's doing, that's the only time he's available. So he's going to be talking to us about fungi next Sunday. I think that's quite early as well. I think it's about 11 o'clock UK time, so that might be a bit of a weird time for those who are not in the UK, but again, there'll be a recording. And Still trying to schedule Will Bonsall, I'm afraid. Still haven't managed to pin him down for his session, but we'll sort that out. And there will be more guest sessions to be slotted in, which I'll let you know about as soon as I can. I'll email everyone with a few kind of assignments, sort of homeworky things to be thinking about between now and the next course weekend, which is actually 18th and 19th of December, so I've moved it forward a week because of Christmas and the festive season and all that kind of stuff. So that's about 3 weeks time as opposed to a month, so hopefully that's okay with everyone. Oh, Sherry, you put your hand up.
It was just a tiny thing for when you're finished, Graham.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I am finished really. So yeah, I'll email with everybody about that in between. And yeah, Sherry, you wanted to.
Well, as well as a thank you for listening to me and indulging me, the kind of energy you get from doing that positive affirmation stuff, I'm sure you've heard this before, but think about this at the end of every day. 3 good things that have happened today, 3 things that I want to take forward. Because the more you focus on it, the more you focus on that good stuff, the more of a habit it will become, and the more it will motivate you to keep going, which is what we need at the moment. So develop a habit of that. It's my parting thought.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'll ring the bell and say goodbye until next time. So thanks again, and bye everyone. And
Thank you, Sherry, for a lovely talk.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. See ya.
See you then.
bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, girl. Bye.
Bye.